There I am. All right. Well, welcome everybody. If you're in the building, have fun, get your drinks and everything yet, but make your way this way. The high dollar seats are already filled. So if you're out there, out and about, you'll have to just pick one up front here. So last week, welcome everybody online, by the way. Last week, Sandra was saying, yeah, this hand comes up, and we changed the seating because last week the seating was all over here, and Sandra's like, I'm having a hard time teaching to the camera and to the people, so I moved the chairs thinking now you're right under the camera, so if you stand up, they'll see your pretty head. I know, now you're nervous, but that way she can teach more to this. So you guys are fine. It's just, you'll never get eye contact. Joel's like, yes, I like it. I like it. Oh, man. Well, seriously, welcome. We have a fun night in store. There won't be any worship tonight, so this is one of those nights where we're going to turn Sandra loose on you, and she's going to teach and probably get real practical and maybe get some conversation going and some fun things like that. So we're really glad you're here. Well, hey there. Welcome. You're never late. You're 2 minutes late. That's like really cool because I have told TJ more than once, you're here more than I am. So, and like never late. So you make me feel better when you're just a little late. Oh, man. Hey, we've got some fun stuff coming up. I think, Jordan, do we have a slide for the July 4th event? So we have historically at what I'm still going to call the Dunn Farm, even though most of the farm has been sold, but we still have the old farmyard over here, and we have a beautiful spot to watch the Island Grove fireworks. If you're not from the local area, that means nothing to you, but the rest of you, it's like, I mean, it's close enough that you feel like you're there. We also see the country club. They always do a nice show, and we see it well. So it's just a fun spot to be on the evening of July 4th. So we're going to do a barbecue at 6 p.m. We're just asking you, we'll have the grill all fired up, so bring whatever meat you want and bring a side to share. And we'll throw the meat on the grill, and we'll just have a good time. We'll meet at 6 and just hang out. And then fireworks, you know how it is. They usually start around 9. It just kind of depends on weather and so forth. But we'd love to have you come. We're inviting everybody, anybody that wants to come and have a good time. So bring the kids, whatever. Bring everybody, and we'll just have a good time. If you're not local, then fly on in. We have a great time here, 4th of July. Speaking of 4th of July, we have a friend that is going to be in town for the week prior to that. He's been a friend for probably 20 plus years. He's actually, let me look at my notes here, on June 30th, so the Friday night before all the fun 4th activities, he is going to be here with us on that Friday night. And Sandra and I are going to do kind of an interview session with him. And I don't know about you guys, but we've done a few of these now, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been fun to bring out, some good solid teaching, but also just have that kind of interaction interview style. And we're going to do this with him when he's here on the 30th. Now, here's the thing. Some of you know him. His name is Joss Graham, and I think we just had a picture of him there. And here's the fun part. He's British, so he's the enemy. Right? I mean, so we can make fun of him like we kicked their butts. Can I say that? Of course I can say that. And we kicked him out of our country, right? So we're going to let him back in briefly and then kick him back out again. So come prepared to make fun of him. But no, seriously, it's going to be a lot of fun. The Grahams, Joss and his brother and the whole family have just been a real blessing to us as friends, but also partners in ministry over the years, and it's been a joy. So you can look forward to that. So the July 4th event, Joss being here. Oh, I also wanted to mention, back here, I haven't mentioned it for a while, but in the lobby, there's a table right there at the entrance, and there's a few books up on the shelves that are for sale, and those are just books that we find really valuable in our lives. So you might look at that sometime and go, well, I haven't read this one or that one or whatever, and those are for sale just for your benefit. And then on the table there's some free stuff. So check that out on your way out. I know there's a couple of cold brew coffee mugs and, just some fun stuff. So don't hesitate to take a look at that table and grab something if you want. And if you're interested in one of the books, just grab probably me tonight. Kenzie could help you too, but she's not here tonight. But normally Kenzie could be there to help you. So before I introduce Sandra, we don't take an offering at Open Fields Church. We just try to make it easy like a lot of churches are anymore. And you'll see the giving opportunities there. Openfieldschurch.com or .org is the easiest way to go and find that. And, I'm very thankful. You all and the online crowd have just been very generous in your giving and so forth. But I was thinking this week, there's a scripture that we all know, and it's one that fits a lot with, I'm not going to try to steal Sandra's thunder here, but for the last couple months when I've taught, I've been teaching a lot about the Good Shepherd. And I'm not going to leave that easily, because I'm realizing that when we talk about in our culture about a good shepherd, there's two things that are a challenge for us to connect with. First of all, what is a shepherd? Some of us have an agricultural background, and so we maybe have a little more of a concept. But really, honestly, most of us don't really understand what a shepherd is. So I've kind of been camping out there. But the other thing is he's good. So it's interesting to me, in Psalm 118, I think it's in, actually, I've got it right here. So let me actually tell you, verse 24. There's a scripture that most of you know, and it's very simply this. This is the day the Lord has crumbly, horribly, disastrously made for you. No, this is the day the Lord has made. And then it moves on, right? It says what God has done, and then it gives us a charge or a commission or a job to do, and that is, therefore, I will rejoice and I will be glad in it. Now, I don't know about you all, but I have plenty of days that I find it a challenge to rejoice in, right? There's plenty of things in life that get messy, that are frustrating. We get tired. We get worn out. I mean, whatever. You can put the list to it. And there are days, in fact, I doubt any of us ever experience a day when there's not a challenge to following this commission. But here's the thing. If you look at the beginning of that psalm, and this is why I prefaced this with what I did about the Good Shepherd. At the beginning of that psalm, the psalmist starts out by saying, God is good. And it's actually said several times leading up to verse 24. So the psalmist is coming from a foundation of believing and saying to us that, listen, God is good and God's love will endure forever. I mean, this is the foundation he sets. And then he says, and this is the day. And you can say that every day. This is the day the Lord has made. And I will rejoice and I will be glad in it. Not because of myself, my own strength, my own ability, but because of him and because he is good. So even when I'm facing that challenge, that difficult spot, that whatever, that day or that moment in most any day that is difficult, I can turn and I can say, but you are good. And you have what it takes for me to sail through this, for me to get over the top of this, for me to move through it. Sometimes we have to, I don't know about you all, but I've got lots of mud over here. I mean, it's just been a muddy spring. And, I put boots on the other day and I stepped in one spot, and when I lifted up, my boot stayed back there, right? I mean, but man, we can get out of that and we can move forward. Sometimes we still have to slog through some things, but he's there for us, right? Amen? Okay, now I'm going to stop preaching because I'm not teaching tonight. Sandra is. So I'm going to turn you over to her, but I'm going to leave you with that good note. And I'm just glad he's our good shepherd, and I'm glad that he designed this day for us, and I'm glad he designed it to hear whatever Sandra has for us to hear. And I trust that our hearts, first of all, that the gift in this beautiful lady will be a blessing to us, and secondly, that our hearts will be ready to receive from words that you say. Including yours. All right? Mm-hmm. So, thank you. Have fun. Turn my butt on. There we go. Okay. It should be on.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Got the important stuff taken care of.
Well, I don't know.
As far as events and fun details that are coming up. So, that's good. It's good to see you. I'm glad y'all are here. We have Seth's parents are, hi, Mom and Dad. I'm sure they're watching. They are at a rehab facility because Rich had a fall. So he is in Windsor and they are recovering. So if you think of him, you can be praying for him. And Jeremy and Misty, I don't know where David and Heather are, but Jeremy and Misty are not feeling well either, so we can be praying for them. I don't know, this weather, it's so annoying. I try so hard to just not be controlled by the weather because I can't control it, but it makes me so crazy. When we haven't had sun, it's June what today? June 16th? Where is the sun? Colorado has this much time anyway for us to enjoy sun and be on the lake and enjoy outside. What is going on? Anyway, first world problem. I shouldn't complain. I'm so thankful for the water. I haven't had to water my garden at all. I know it's good for the land, all the things, and I am thankful. And I also want sun. So, tonight we are going to talk about Genesis 16, and we're actually only going to talk through verses 1 through 6. And really, I probably should just do the first 2 verses and do an entire message, but I am still trying to progress through all the Old Testament stories because that's what we're working on. So this is Genesis 16, 1 through 6. I will read it and then we will talk about it. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, how old do you think I am?
39.
This old. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar, or Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, "Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her, God, what a mess. Sorry, I'm going to start that over. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, to her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarai, "Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please." Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and Hagar fled from her. And it goes on and talks about Hagar and things that Hagar experienced and had been through. But you all see the story that we are working with here, right? This is Sarah saying, so far, God promised me kids. He's not coming through, so we need to figure something out, right? It's been 10 years. It's been too long, so we have to figure this out. So Sarai proceeds to give Abram ideas on what they can do. Now, before we get too far into this, I want to remember, if you were here when we were very first starting with Genesis, we talked about in the beginning God, and how in the Jewish classes, when young boys are starting in their Jewish classes and learning about the Torah, the instructor will often say, "Could you read the beginning, Genesis 1:1?" And the student will read, "In the beginning God," and he'll say, "Stop. What does that say?" And the kid will say, "In the beginning God." And then he tries to keep going. Created. No. Stop. What does he say? In the beginning God created. No. Tell me what it says. Verse 1, Genesis 1:1, what does it say? In the beginning, God, and the kid keeps trying, and the instructor keeps stopping him. And the point that he's making is, in the beginning, God. And the way I have made this point with you all is, God, who is bigger than me, stronger than me, smarter than me, wiser than me, more just than me, more compassionate than me, braver than me, kinder than me, God. And there's something to understand that in the beginning, God. This isn't your story. This isn't my story. This isn't Abram's story or Noah's story or Paul's story, Peter, Stephen. No, this is God's story. In the beginning, God. And there's something to this about us trusting the story. And I believe that that's even why God started it out the way he started it out. In the beginning, God, so that we trust the story that he is building and creating, not that we are creating our own story. So God is asking us, as he was asking Sarai and Abram, to trust. And we get to respond to him. Will you trust? Will you and will I trust? This is the one thing that is in your hands to do. Trust the story. Now, when our son was young, I don't know if he remembers this, but we would tell him over and over again, as well as our daughter, your one job is to obey. That's it. You don't have to figure out if we're right or wrong. And Jordan definitely knew we were wrong, especially as he got older. We were always wrong. He was very smart, and probably the majority of the time in dealing with me, he probably did know better. He probably was right, because he was incredibly intelligent, still is. But I had to tell him over and over again, your one job is to obey. Not to figure it out, not to be smarter than me, not to come up with better ideas, not to create your own path, your own way. Your one job is to obey. And that's our one job, is to trust. That's it. We don't have to figure it all out. We don't have to have it planned all out. And when we think we fail, or something went wrong, or we were victimized, or something didn't happen the way we thought it should, our one job is to trust the story. Now, this is the one thing that is in your hands and is up to you. I want to show a short video. Warning. That I can trust the story, and I can trust in a God who is bigger than me. And that's really a big part of what I want us to learn, better than what some of our ancestors and forefathers learned. I want us to figure this out. I think I should talk the way he does. Sarai with no children. It's been 10 years. Sarai has been in Canaan 10 years. There's no proof of any promise coming to pass. They were told, we've been given this promise that we will have a son, that we will have a nation that is bigger than the stars in the sky, the sand on the sea, on the shore, that we will not be able to number all of our descendants. But Sarai is barren, and even after the promise, I am sure they attempted to make the promise come true. She is not having any kids. 10 years. And Sarai decides this is long enough to wait. 10 years is enough that I can't wait any longer. 10 years is enough that I need to help God. I need to figure this out. I'm going to help God figure this out. My question for you is, what promise do you have where you say, I'm going to help God? How long are you willing to wait before you decide, I need to help God and I need to figure this out for him? What am I willing to wait for? How long am I willing to wait? And how long am I willing to trust? Okay? So we need to understand that all along in the big picture, God is wanting Adam, Noah, Lot, Abram, all of them that we know, to trust the story. Now, remember last time we talked about Abram has gone to Egypt because there was famine in the land, and he knew going to Egypt where there was water and there was provision that he would be taken care of. So he'd gone into Egypt, and that was when he had lied about Sarah and said, she's my sister, which if you study, there's some truth in that because they were sort of kind of related. But he had gotten in trouble. Pharaoh had tried to take his wife, and he found out that Sarai was his wife, not his sister. And so Pharaoh said, get out of my country, take all of this stuff, all the stuff that you've gathered, take the finances you've gathered, the animals that you've gathered, all the goods that you have gathered, get out of my country. So Abram has come to rely on provision from Egypt, right? He's become dependent on that because he got all of that stuff while he was in Egypt. So here we have Sarai, who is no longer believing God for the promise that was given. And we have Abram, who's become so dependent on Egyptian wealth that he has allowed Egypt to get into their lives. And in fact, we see this because Hagar is Egyptian. So now Abram has not only taken all this other stuff out of the country, now they have servants who are Egyptian as well. And there's this idea out there in the Jewish world of understanding that it's hard for God to get Egypt out of his people. It's not hard to get the people out of Egypt, but it's hard to get Egypt out of his people. And so here Abram has this maid of Sarai that is Egyptian, and certainly the whole problem of depending on Egypt to be his provision is what's happening. So here he is, and Sarai, she's done trying to believe God. So she's going to come up with this idea of a way to help. So in verse 2, Sarai blames God, right? What does she say? She says, and Sarai said to Abram, behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go to my servant that I may obtain children. So now, not only she's taken the next step, not only now do we have God's not going to come through on his promise, God's actually keeping me from having kids. So we've taken that next step. Now we're blaming God, right? There's a psychiatrist, his name is Abraham Twersky, and he says human beings need 4 things. They need air, food, drink, and someone to blame. And we see that all the time, right? Every single one of us blames somebody. And so here Sarai is blaming God. Not only is he not coming through, he's also keeping me from having children. So she says, rather than trusting the story, I think it's a good idea for you to just go in with my servant Hagar and have a child through her. Now, I wanted to read this again. I told you guys about this a little bit last week, but The Rational Bible by Dennis Prager. If you struggle with reading the Bible, I would encourage you. This is just Genesis. So, but it's excellent because he's got all kinds of commentary in here. So it reads through the scripture and then it gives his commentary. And Dennis Prager is, I would say, a very godly man. And he is Jewish, and so he is doing all 5 books of the Torah. He would not claim to be a Christian, but he is Jewish and he loves the Torah. And so he has Genesis and Exodus finished. I don't think he's done with Leviticus, Numbers, or Deuteronomy yet, but when he is, I'm going to get those. Anyway, so I wanted to read this. This was one of his comments on verse 2. It says, according to the laws of Hammurabi, and other ancient Near Eastern legal documents, it was common for an infertile wife to provide her husband with a concubine in order to bear children for the couple. Those children were considered the wife's children as much as biological children would be. So interesting, right? Because now we're talking about taking Hagar's kids and now they're theirs. Yeah. That's goofy. Right? Like, how is this going to work out? This is not going to work out well because Sarai is barren. Now Hagar is going to go meet with Abram, sleep with him, have his kids, and these kids will now be considered Sarah's kids according to the culture of the day. Now, Abram here decides it's a good idea to listen to Sarai.
What are you chuckling at?
This is funny to me because why?
Yeah.
Is he, in our day, many people would be like, well, yeah, he's excited about the prospect of sleeping with somebody else. But you understand in their day and in their culture, that wasn't a thing. I mean, I'm not saying he wasn't going to enjoy it. I don't know. But it was not a part of the culture to just like, oh, sweet. It wasn't that. It was, we can have kids, finally. Yeah. I also think it's interesting that Abram decides this is a good idea when he's supposed to be trusting the story. And when he believes that God is going to come through. What are you doing? Right? So, he listens to her and he obeys her. Now, how many of you have watched Fiddler on the Roof? Okay, so most of you know this scene. It's a crappy recording, but I could not get a better recording. I looked all over. But if you have not watched it, it gives such a good picture about the Jewish culture. Like, you really begin to understand the Jewish culture. So in this scene, Tevye, who is the man of the house, is like determined to have his way, do what he says we're going to do. We're going to do this thing. And he gets very upset with his wife because she is very much the boss and he doesn't like it. And he intends to be the boss. So this is how he goes about being. This is so common, I'm sure, in the Jewish world, but this is like Men know that they need to lead and be the man, but they also have this problem. Generally speaking, if I were to ask all of you in this room that are married, have been married, and you were to answer me honestly, I'm guessing all of you would say, I am scared of my wife. Now, some of you may not have that feeling, which awesome, but men want to lead. They were created to lead. They were created to be in charge. You remember a story, another story we've talked about in Scripture, where somebody gave in to what his wife suggested. Yes? Who? Adam. Very first man decides it's better to listen to his wife than to listen to God. I am begging you, men. I don't care how scared of a woman you are. Please, for the love of God, would you please stand up and commit to following what God says and what God promises over what some woman tells you. You realize between Adam and Eve and now Abram and Sarai, we have massive chaos in our lives because of the, stupid decision these two men made to listen to the women in their lives. It makes me crazy. Now, men, that doesn't mean you need to be a jerk, right? It doesn't mean you get to be dictator. That's right. No. But it is important that you as men understand when God has given you a promise and has given you a word, stand on that no matter what. No matter what your sweet woman says, no matter what your scary woman says, stand on what God has told you. Be firm and be decisive about that. Father's Day is coming on Sunday, and I'm not going to share that. If you want to know what I was going to share, you can ask me afterwards. I just don't want it on camera. So, Father's Day is coming, and my hope and my goal for you is that every single one of you recognize I think the world tears you down and talks about how pathetic you are, how dumb you are. Like so many TV shows portray dumb guys, right? I could list them. Portrays men who are either obsessed with parts of themselves and how to satisfy that, are obsessed with making sure that they get what they want, no matter what. Don't know how to sacrifice, but also are portrayed and beaten down as weak, as stupid, as incompetent. And I'm telling you, if you believe that, it screws us all over.
Come on.
You need to know who you are, and you need to stand firm in that, and you need to be men and be strong. And the only way to do that is for you to have a relationship with God where you are connected to Him, connected to His heart, and know what He's saying. And I'm telling you, if you want to be good men and good fathers, it requires knowing who God is, knowing who you are, and being in a relationship with Him. And that is how you do something different than what Adam and Abram did. Now, we've talked about all the good stuff that Abram did, so I'm not just dogging on him. But in this story, he screwed with a lot of people's lives because he gave into what Sarai suggested he do, instead of trusting the story and saying to her, no, we are going to trust God. We're going to watch His promise come to pass for us. Okay?
So Sandra, culturally, her idea was fairly common. So the real crime here, if there's a crime, is that she lost trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because to us culturally, it seems really weird to think she went to another man, but that was not culturally weird.
Yes, yeah, and that's a good point. It
So
was
the big-
not,
the
that was
headline
not
is-
unacceptable. It made sense. The problem was she chose not to believe God. Remember, it says Abram, in Genesis 15, Abram believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness, right? And it's also funny to me that in Genesis 15, we don't know how much time passes between 15 and 16, right? But in Genesis 15, Abram believed God. Genesis 16, okay, that seems like a good idea. No, you don't do that. You don't just decide, now I'm not going to believe God because this thing isn't happening. When you just believed God and it was credited to you as righteousness, and now you're shifting. So the problem, yes, culturally, we don't get that. It seems real goofy, right? Except for people who enjoy sister wives. But it seems real goofy to think of that being okay. And the reality is, the problem was Sarah's belief system, blaming God. And so I'm going to help him out, and I'm going to make sure this happens one way or another. And that's exactly where I was headed to next, is women. Stop telling your men to do dumb stuff. Don't do it. Like, when God has given us a promise and God has given us something to stand on, we need to stand on that. Because when we decide to say something to our husbands, if they're in a place of weakness, we are going to mess with their lives, mess with other people's lives. So, I wanted to say, men need to stand up and be strong. And even when they might face a little temporary pain from their wife because they said no to something, it's worth standing on when you know it's a promise of God. And women, it's okay for you to trust your husbands and let him lead you and let him be the one to make the decision. That is okay. That is part of what we do. In a marriage, we have compromise. We give to each other. It is all of us working together in a marriage. If you are single, find somebody who you can be on the same team with. That you are a unit, you're on the same team, you're facing the same goals and the same things so that you can work together to accomplish that. And even when you get in a position where there's strife, you can go, hang on, let's figure this out as a team. Right? This has to happen together. So, okay.
Amen on that.
All right. So this is 2 verses in. We're at about 25 minutes I've spent on that. So we have 4 to go, but I want to get through them. Abram and Sarai were in Canaan 10 years. Apparently 10 years was Sarai's limit. We talked about this. So then Abram and Hagar are unified, and Hagar becomes pregnant. Now, I'm going to touch on a little bit sensitive subject. If you are watching at home and you have children in the room, it is up to you to decide if you need to get them out of the room. But we're going to talk just briefly a little bit about sex. Okay, if you don't want to hear it, you have permission. Go outside in the rain, be drenched with his greatness. Here's the deal. Something that we often don't understand, and that young people especially don't hear and don't understand, is sex connects you to the person you are having sex with. It is a biological, scientific thing. I said this, I was talking with somebody recently about this, and the way I said it, they were like, gross. I was like, sorry. So I have to try to pick my words carefully. But there is actually an agent, a hormone in the female body that is a gluing agent that creates a bond. So I'm not just saying don't have sex before marriage. I'm saying don't attach yourself to people before you're married to them, because it is damaging. You are connecting yourself with them. You are becoming one with them. And that makes it very difficult when if you do not continue the relationship with them. You are then kind of in all sorts of pieces. Now, if there's people who have done this, I don't want you to feel condemned, because God is still good and somehow merciful and miraculous. So I also, in saying that, want you to understand there's a reason God says not to do it before marriage, but it is not because he's trying to mess with your fun, right? He is not after ruining your life. He is after helping you build an excellent life. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, if you want some scientific proof on that, I will help you find it, but I know that this is a biological situation that we're talking about. So Hagar conceives, and then it says in verse 4 that Hagar looks with contempt on Sarai because of her infertility. So now Sarai has quit trusting God and blamed God. Abram has decided to listen to his wife and do this thing, connect with Hagar. Hagar is pregnant, and now Hagar, like a little woman would, like just rude, like girl fight, right? Dumb cat fight stuff, where Hagar now is looking at Sarai with contempt and like, I'm better than you. Look what I have, you don't have, right? So this becomes conflict in the house. And Sarai then, in verse 5, is mad, but now she's mad at who? Abram. Now it's Abram's fault, right? This story is like, you guys, get it together. It's such a mess. Sarai doesn't like Hagar in the first place, but she's her maid. Then says, Abram, go ahead and sleep with her so we can have a kid. Then Hagar gets pregnant. Now Sarai's mad. She's mad because God keeps her from having a baby. She can't trust him. And now she's told Abram what to do, and he did it. And now she's mad that he did it because now Hagar's pregnant. And now she's mad at Hagar and Abram and God. And Abram's in trouble for doing the very thing she told him to do. I also suspect there are men in this room who are like, just the way a woman is, like, this is just what you deal with. You never know. I'm one way, you know what, the phrase, right? Can't
live with them, can't live without them.
Exactly. Can't live with them, can't live without them. So Sarai says to Abram, this is all your fault. Now that Hagar is treating me like crap, being terrible to me, this is your fault. And Abram, the Bible says it so nicely. And Sarai said to Abram, may the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge heaven between you and me. Sorry, there's no heaven. May the Lord judge between you and me. Wow, what a piece of work, right? Like you can't do that. You don't get to do that. I'm thinking about Abram and Sarai coming into my office and being like, I just don't understand him. He goes and makes Hagar pregnant. Now I'm the one who's getting contempt when, I just don't understand it. And I'd be like, Sarai, you understand, like, you asked him to do this. And Abram would be like, yeah. And then I'd be like, Abram, really? Why did you do this? You had the promise of God. And you're both at fault here, right? So there would be that kind of a discussion. Sarai needed air, food, and drink, and someone to blame. Right? So Sarai declares that the Lord shall judge between you and me. Then Abram throws the responsibility back on Sarai. He says, She's your maid. You deal with her however you want to. Abram needs air, food, and drink, and someone to blame. This is on you. So you deal with Hagar however you want. The whole household has walked into a whole lot of problems because they did not trust the story. They did not believe that God would come through for them. So Sarai is mean. She torments Hagar until Hagar leaves. Now we're going to talk a lot about that later. But it's important that we understand the value of trusting the story. You realize 10 years down the road, if Sarah had been like, I still don't have kids. I don't know what's going on. But God said, I can trust him that he's going to provide kids to us. If Abram had said, Sarai, I'm not going to go in with Hagar because God said, and we've got a bigger story going on here. We have someone stronger than us, bigger than us, braver than us, wiser than us, kinder than us, more just than us, more compassionate than us that we can trust. So let's keep trusting. The story would be so different. And you understand the story would be different for us today. It's phenomenal to me that our world now, 3,000, 4,000, 8,000, I don't know how long ago Abram lived, but however long ago he lived, he made a decision, and Sarai made a decision that is affecting us today. That is incredible. One man, one woman changed the course of history. Of course, we have it with Adam and Eve as well. And I know none of you in this room feel important enough to think that you will change the course of history over the next 2,000 years, 6,000 years, whatever it may be. But your decisions are affecting people. Whether it changes the course of history in the long run or it changes right now. But I want to encourage you that your decisions affect people around you. It is important to understand that when you make decisions out of selfishness, it affects people around you. It doesn't just affect you. That's part of why this idea of I'm going to live my best life, I'm going to be the best version of me, I'm going to do what I want, is so wrong, so scary, so sad. Those people, and I say those people, including me, have to understand when I make a decision, it affects others around me. Now, I am not one to just be like, I'll just do whatever they want, whatever they want, whatever they want, whatever they want. No. I am working to live my best life. I am working to be the best version of me that I can be. But understanding that within that, making those kinds of decisions and living that kind of life, the way I behave and the decisions I make affects others. And it's important that I trust the story, that I remind myself of a God who's bigger than me, better than me, stronger than me, etc., that I lean into the big picture and the big story. I had an event here the last couple weeks that went completely the opposite way of what I thought it was going to go. I was shocked. Everybody around me that I had told about what was going on was shocked. And it was like, what? And when something like that goes haywire, and you've put a lot into it, a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of you can do this. Like, I spent so much time encouraging myself in the Lord of like, you can do this. You have the brains. You have the ability. You're going to be great at this. You just got to push through. You've got to. I had spent so much energy and time and effort, as well as gas and driving like 2 places to make this thing happen. And when it didn't happen, there was so much shock and so much frustration that it took me a little bit to get past it. And what I want to say is, when you've put that much into something, it's very tempting to let a little bit of bitterness come in, a little bit of anger, a little bit of, I kind of want to, yell at people, and I want to understand this, and, well, that's so unfair, and why this, and why that? No, it's just not. No. Calm yourself. Iago, you can be calm. You can be okay. It is okay for you to make decisions now that are best for your future and best for you going forward, that don't affect people negatively. When I kind of want to do some things to affect some people negatively. But I'm not, because I'm not that person. And I understand that the decisions I make and the way I choose to live affects people around me. So, all of you in this room, including myself, the bigger picture here is understanding that your life affects others. And the value of you trusting the story, the value of you leaning in and trusting God in the midst of whatever's happening in your life is massive, because it affects you, it affects others around you, and it can affect a lot of people to come. Okay? All right. So, we've seen a lot, we've learned a lot from Abram, Sarai, and Hagar. So, there's a reason God, bigger than you, stronger than you, has given us the Torah. It's there for us to learn. Now, one thing that we've not talked about, and this is the point of doing the stories that we do at all anyway, I don't know if you remember, I think TJ, you will remember. What is the purpose of going through these Old Testament stories? Why are we doing this? We have 2 reasons. I talk about this every time, and I always, one of these times, I'm going to be like, yes!
There's one of them.
What?
To see Jesus.
Yes! She hasn't even been here a ton.
I listen to them all.
Oh, nice. So, to see Jesus in the story. What's the other reason? I wanted to go back to the Old Testament because we're told so much about how good God is and da-da-da-da-da, and yet in the Old Testament, there's some stories that seem a little like, I'm not sure about this God being so good because he seems a little harsh. So we're going back through those stories in order to see what?
His goodness.
The character, overall character of God. We're working to find the character of God. Now, so let's think about this story. What do we see in the character of God in this story? Or what do we not see?
I think you see his patience.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
Okay, good. Patience. Yeah, absolutely. You or me were God would probably be like, what?
What are you doing?
Yeah, excellent.
I told you. You can trust me. Okay, his patience. What else? Nothing.
This sounds a little too generic, but we see his love.
How?
Well, you can't be patient like he is, and also, I don't know how it works for God, but it would appear that now the plan that he was working on didn't happen. It's kind of like what you were just describing that you experienced, right?
Yeah.
So outside of himself, Abram made a decision, part. I mean, God didn't make that decision. Abram made that decision, but it affected God. So I think you made the comment that our decisions affect other people. Our decisions also affect God. So he had to go back to the drawing board to some degree. Now, some would argue that, well, he knew that was going to happen. Well, fine. I mean, to me, that's insignificant because he still had to go back to the drawing board. He was working a plan, and now the plan's changed. So he still had an end goal to get to.
Yeah.
And so the love in that, which we see in his patience, is incredible. Because he didn't give up on Abram then, or Sarah.
Right.
Sarai,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. You didn't give up on Abram or Sarai.
And he, in my opinion, should have.
That's incredibly loving. Yeah. At that point, he could have been like, Abram, how many things have we been through together? Just Genesis 15, just the last chapter, you were trusting me. Now you're not? No, I'm going to find somebody else because you're not my man. That wasn't his response. It is interesting how there's not a ton of God's voice in this story. But we can learn a lot about God's character from the story, even without his voice in it. Okay, so patience, love, confidence. It's incredible that God can be affected by us. I always find that blows my mind, that God is affected by me. That's a whole other message.
Yeah.
Anything else? I think it's incredible, and we'll see more of this as we go through the next section, but the way God treats Hagar. And also the way he doesn't treat Sarai. Again, like the little, I always think it's funny because for guys it's called a pissing match and for girls it's called a cat fight. Whatever you want to call it, it's funny to me that Sarai and Hagar have this thing. And I'm like, what are you doing? But again, I think there's a lot about Egypt coming into this family that is part of the problem. That again goes back to Abram trying to provide for his family, which is why he took them to Egypt. But it definitely created some issues, and God still continues to choose Abram.
I think you see faithfulness to his promises. Because even though it was a servant, he still honored the promise he made to Abram in her.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy too, that God is like, okay, this is, okay, Abram, this is what we're doing. Right? But he still honored a promise in this. And actually, again, as you'll see as we go forward, added to the promise. When this is something I don't understand, like, why didn't God, get angry with Hagar and Ishmael and just whatever? God's obviously not mean and harsh, because if he was, he would have just taken out Ishmael. But because he's standing with his promise that he gave to Abram of the fruit of your loins being blessed, he's like, okay, well, now we're going to add this in. Interesting. So not like us. Any other thoughts? What about how do we see Jesus in this story? This question for me is always the harder one.
I was just thinking about Joel's comment that God's faithful to his promise. And I think there's an element of seeing Jesus in that God's faithful to his promise, but even more, or with that, not more than that, but with that, he's faithful to fulfill in Abram what he's promised. So it's the promise, but it's also a commitment to the man. And I think, I look at Jesus and I'm like, Jesus gave his life in order that we might live.
Yeah.
And so God not giving up on Abram, but staying committed to his promise there, even when Abram screwed up, was a commitment to the promise, but also to the man Abram. And that is Jesus. Jesus never has given up on us, even to the point of giving his own life, going to the cross. I think we forget sometimes that, Jesus, right up to the end, had the power and the right and the privilege to call in a legion of angels and deliver him. He did not have to complete that. He did that by choice. So once again, God could have, and if I was God, I would have smote Abraham right there. But no, he stayed committed to the promise, even in the midst of the mess.
Yeah.
Committed to the man as well of Abram.
Yeah.
Man, there's so much of Jesus in that, in my opinion.
Yeah. Anybody else? Thoughts? How we see Jesus? I know this isn't like, some of the stories we'll talk about are like, when the Israelites lifted up the serpent on the cross, and I don't know if you know the story, but the Jewish people had to look at the cross in order to be healed. When they got bitten by snakes, they would just look at the cross and they would be healed. And so it was a picture of Jesus, right? So it was a very clear, what do they call it, a shadow of Jesus. And I love that story, and we'll get there. But within that, I think this doesn't have such a clear picture like that, but it does. I think the thing I thought about is like God sticking with Abram because he's seeing the bigger picture. Like, Jesus is coming through this man. And so I think, to me, I know it's not the perfect shadow, right, type or shadow, but it is like God is saying, Jesus is coming through this man's line. And so I think that is important and kind of how we see Jesus.
Well, the importance that it came through a broken line, a scarred line, a messed up line.
Yeah, yeah.
It didn't come through perfect.
Perfection, yeah. Yeah.
So wouldn't that be in the full story to begin with?
Right.
So I don't know that I necessarily see it as, wait a minute, what are you doing? As opposed to, this was the ultimate plan because he needed to come through a scarred line, a broken line, a messed up family.
And I don't know if I would say he needed to, but we knew he was going to. Because no matter what, God's dealing with humans, right? And we mess up. And I do think there's something incredibly beautiful that Jesus could come through humanity that way. Crazy.
I think it's a shadowing of the covenant. God put him to sleep and walked through, representing both.
Right.
He had to keep the covenant 100%.
Yeah.
Whereas in this story, he obviously has to carry the promise 100%. Because everyone in the story failed
Yeah. Yeah.
him. And I think it's a shadowing of the covenant.
Yeah. That's so good. If you didn't hear last week's, you should go listen to last week's, because we talked about the walking through the blood path and how Abram didn't cut that covenant with God. Abram didn't ever walk through the blood path. But God sent pillar of fire, basically, and smoke. There were two symbols walking through that blood path, and they were both presence of God symbols. So it was God cutting the covenant, saying, Abram, I know you can't do this. I know you will make mistakes and you will fail. I'm going to do this for you. And he walked through twice as the groom and as the father of the bride. He walked through and made that covenant. So we talked about that last week. So that's really good. Yeah, that God is carrying the covenant. Even though it was made with Abram, it wasn't made with Abram, but it was. Abram was the man to carry the covenant in a sense, but not fully. And God was committed to carrying that completely. Okay, anybody else before I move on? Okay. So, we have time, and I am trying to decide if we should play a game or if I should ask you questions. Either way, we can learn things about each other, and we can also learn things about our perspectives. And I think that would be more fun than just questions. So We're going to vote. The options are a game or questions. And the game is questions, but that doesn't matter. Okay, so you're going to raise your hand. How many of you want to do the game? How many of you want to do questions? And some of you don't want to do either, and that's okay, but you're going to. So, should have pen and paper in the seat pockets. So if not, we can get you some. Can you make that happen? And or there should be pens as well.
Yeah, there's a few spread around here.
Anybody who's not here tonight is totally missing out because this is the funnest part. Do you want something, does anybody want something hard to write on?
Anybody else need a pen?
You want to grab a couple books? Books to write on? Okay, question number 1. If you have played this game and you know what's coming, please don't spoil it. Okay.
Perfect.
Did you not find any?
Any what?
Books.
I guess I'm headed to my office.
Okay, question number 1. What is your favorite color? And, that's the question, you need to come up with 3 reasons why. And I don't want it to be something like red because I like tomatoes. I want it to be red because it signifies to me passion or fire. Deep reasons why you like that. Well, do your best. This isn't a graded. This isn't.
Because I like it? Is that fair?
That can be one.
Because I really like it?
No. What is your favorite color? And you have to write what are the 3 reasons why. Not I really like it, I really, really like it, I really, really, really like it. And not because it's the color of tomatoes.
Told me.
No.
Oh, that goes against